of the debate and the idea, the discussion around the performance, a work in process, which is actually being put out. And perhaps these are small communities, but I don't think everything, I think there are public interventions and there are smaller interventions, and they have their own space. So I think actually it would be wonderful to see the kind of Bangalorean model perhaps work its way into other kinds of, I mean, I'm intrigued that Bangalore is the home of software, but it doesn't produce the greatest amount of video art. It doesn't produce new media, essentially, but it produces dialogue. It's got a great dialogic space. And I think for us to limit ourselves to models like the art fair, the museum, and the catalogue or book writing is a failure. Yep. Perhaps there is another kind of a model, and our kind of model is actually conversation and debate. I think India's or South Asia's oral histories, issues of, I mean, the entire Buddhist or Hindu canon has been debated. All the greatest issues or the greatest sticky points in history have been resolved through debate. And I think this is a valid art form in itself. If we can, honor what happens in a room like this, it's as valuable to me as a public art intervention.
Just adding what she has mentioned, that technologies and ITs and all this, but as she said, that there are more, different potentials of kind of models which can be developed. So in that case, I mean, Hyderabad is also the city, newly developed city like Bangalore. So in that case, I mean, Hyderabad maybe can be the place that, as a kind of practice model can be developed. So
the Indian narratives tend to be dense. They're very dense. If we are going to take a look at the street, the Indian street, which churns out so much material, it's religion, it's politics, it's cinema, and then there is a great overlay of mythology. There is an issue of translation. Buddhist, very easy, much easier. And in that sense, therefore, who has the patience to read maybe miles and miles of narrative on the walls of a museum? That's one. But the other is the question of validation. I think it's an interesting one, and I think the story I would quote to you is of the Maharaja of Baroda, who nearly 100 years ago brings across a British art critic and builds up a collection. I think and he builds up a collection which is, on display in the Baroda Museum even today. I think the investment in a very sound kind of curatorial practice, that is actually the way to do this within the public domain in terms of collection building. That's just a possibility.
Most of the quote-unquote more successful dealers are ones who have stuck with their artists for a long time and have supported them and have nurtured their ideas and watched them grow and have respected those ideas and have created a space for those ideas to be shown. And in particular, the galleries that are most interesting, I think, historically in New York, are the ones that help to establish those ideas by doing programming that wouldn't look like a gallery. A lot of galleries began by doing performances, by doing things that weren't for sale, by doing works that were not commodifiable. Likewise, galleries have been moving towards lectures. They've been bringing in people from other fields who actually the artists themselves are reading. The best galleries are the ones that actually listen to their artists and try to understand the work, and in their inability to understand the work, articulate that by trying to think out loud with their audience. For example, I don't particularly like the work of a gallery. There's one in New York called Miguel Abreu, in which many of the artists read French philosopher Alain Badiou. So they bring him to the gallery, and he speaks. And one could have an argument that this creates some sort of cultural capital wherein they're trying to cash in by having advertising. Fine. You get in the car, sometimes you crash, sometimes you get to where you need to go. Everything has a dualistic ability. At the same time, it also is situated in discourse. It's having people come in. It's having people like me, myself, I think that is very wrong. And I'm presented with a space in which to talk to him about that, and going back to the idea of dialogical spaces. And that's the same sort of relationship that the artists themselves are having, struggling with the philosopher, struggling with themselves, and so on and so forth. So I would say really the best practices from dealers are really the ones who shut up and listen to their artists and figure out ways of supporting that and basically continuing to question and wonder and figure out how to develop with, go in hand with the artists.
I just wanted to say that there are very few voices here. Like Akiko was saying yesterday, we do need plenty more voices that need to participate also in this process to extend it and to expand it much further. I think Pooja Sood is here. They are doing, I think, lots of work in trying to push some new voices, and there are other people here like Robinson was mentioning. So, you know, it's slowly heading, like there have been positive points raised here today. We are heading, I think that it is in our hands. We can now direct it in a particular way. Who are writers, we are the same people who are curators, we are the same people who work in the galleries, we are the reading public, and we are participating in exhibitions. We are also sometimes practicing artists ourselves. So I think there is also a notion of conflict of interest here because we are a limited number of people working in this entire field. And so decisions being made, when it is made in a center like Delhi, for us, you know, in Bangalore, we know that yes, there are certain decision makers, there are certain authorities here who perhaps make certain trends and positions very clear. And everything sometimes falls into a particular framework because of that.
Why Indian artists are working with all the several galleries. I mean, it's unbelievable. And that goes back to the question of this, question of balance. Everybody talking about art fair, which is good, but at the same time, I think, we need other, sort of public institution, some space who gives, different kind of validation, about art.
I think the gallery is a street structure. It's across the artist studio, the artwork can cross from the studio on the street to the gallery on the street. And the art fair is the extension of the street. It's at that level. It's not climbing the pyramid. And if the pyramid of the formal biennale and the museum structure is absent, then you use the available structure that you have. But is that the best way to receive art? Or if you're talking about art as a science of knowledge, then of course it could be a terrible failure, which is what we just talked about. Then you don't have mediation. Then you need the interlocutor, whoever it may be. And that's where text, curating, display, etc. become the formalized space. But at the moment, at the level of the street, I think this is really where we are. And I think we should accept that, and accept that whether it's the mall, whether it's 400 galleries, like Rajendra said, which is a great achievement compared to the 100 that we had earlier. That's where it is. And this is a given. So unless the rest of the pyramid gets activated, also the development of the notion of the sublime, and the development of the notion of the sublime in Schopenhauer or Kant includes the idea of great terror and beauty. I mean, terror, I think it's Burke and Schopenhauer, of course. If you look at it down from Longinus downwards, Longinus talks about the sublime as the sublime is inspiration and the sublime is grand. But by the time you come down to Burke and you come down to the great German philosophers like Kant, there is an absolute separation of aesthetics and the sublime. So aesthetic beauty, what we're talking about, but the sublime is also about great terror. Great, and I think the fact that these can sort of, they can coexist is actually, I think this is an exhibitionary model that the West has adopted extremely well. And perhaps it's something that we have some discomfort.
Adam, you were about to say something.
Well, I mean, it's a little, Kant begins asking, where do you get the pleasure from a sunrise? And it's the fact that you say you do. And it's the rationalization and the bringing into an analysis and creating a judgment of something, which he then relates to aesthetics. He's never really talking about art. He's talking about aesthetics. He's talking about the creation of subjecthood and the creation of using rationality to create the world. That's why it was called the idealism and so on and so forth. And then ultimately, this goes, Burke is, keep in mind, this is the guy that wrote the book saying the French Revolution is the horrible thing, they should bring the king back. So keep in mind who's talking. Says, yeah, that's nice, but we prefer beautiful as domestication, and sublime is more like a virus, to use a modern analogy, or something you argue with with the goal of domesticating it. So he's already kind of taken Kant and made it really weak. Then you have guys like Schopenhauer and ultimately, unfortunately, what? Yeah. But ultimately, then we have this idea, which goes back to our idea of the public, of this idea of shock. So countering, going back to the idea, again, of the virus model, is art is the thing that slows down the pace of your life to grab you, actually in the German term, it's to make you calm down and actually get rid of your stress of how confusing the life is and make you think about that and actually act as a form of therapy. So, but is this even a good model, though? Should you?
Is this a model?
Yeah, is
It's
this
a
a model?
possible.
Should art be an agitation? Should art be a problem? And is there a problem with thinking of art even as such?
No, let's actually take it right.
Own mind. You see, that's something I really how to say, interesting.
I'm very taken up with something I'm working on, and it's working with actually, or using, as curators tend to do, scavenge of knowledge. And this is the idea of the peak shift effect, which is by he's a neuropsychiatrist, but he's of a very high order, a man called Ramachandran. And he's worked on a model that was used in the 50s by two other scientists who analyzed the way the artist looks at an art object as emanating from the brain rather than from the retina. So why does an artist represent in a certain way? And it could be anybody. So it's a Chola bronze, or it's Picasso, or it's Mondrian's grids. It could be anybody. He's named and he sort of justifies his selection. But it sort of crosses history. It crosses cultures. And it is a way, it's called the peak shift. There is something in the way, there is a perceptual model that is perhaps unique to the artist. And that is what actually brings about his response to an object before he responds to it in whatever medium that he chooses. I think I'm deeply fascinated with it.